I'm Glenn Powell, welcoming you to the Texas Tribune Festival. Every year, this weekend is about big ideas about the future of our state and our country. In case this is your first rodeo, you're going to hear things and meet people you don't agree with. And that's the point. At TribFest, the rules are we listen to each other. We treat each other with respect despite our differences, so be kind, be courteous, and most of all, be civil. And if you can't be civil, well, I happen to know a hitman.
Yeah, all righty. Hello. Hi.
Everybody.
I always forget how bright it is, but I'm with stars, and so I'm sure it's fine for them. Thank you all for being here. We're so excited to be with you. Just a little bit of a programming note. Congresswoman Jayapal was not able to join us because she's under the weather. However, I do promise that you're going to have a pretty spectacular conversation with the gentleman that I have here right now. And they don't really need introduction, but I will do it here. At my absolute far left is the Minnesota Attorney General, Keith Ellison.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
And a hometown hero to my left is Congressman Greg Casar.
Woo! Woo-hoo!
And a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, which I'm sure you do, for our speakers, please submit them at texastribune.org/ask. Darla Cameron from the Trib is going to present the questions at the end of our program. So we promise to make time to be able to answer your questions. But I appreciate y'all being here. So I am going to start with you. May I call you Greg?
You may.
Okay. I'm going to start with you, Greg, because we're going to get hometown right now.
Oh, yeah.
I just want you to understand
hometown.
that. We're getting hometown. So, Greg, it is an inescapable conversation that we have to have about immigration. And I'm also—
We're starting right from there.
We got to go. I'm just going for the jugular. So, I'm from Florida. I've seen the games, the shenanigans, the antics that were pulled by Ron DeSantis. I know. I roll my eyes too, Keith. And I have to ask you, though, when we have a conversation like the one we're having now about a progressive America, how do we reconcile what those ideas are about being a country that welcomes all, but with the idea of making sure that we can protect and make sure that this place is safe for all?
Well, thank you for the question. Thanks, everybody, for joining at the Texas Tribune Festival. And I think that we can get back to where we were not that long ago as a country, where we recognized and talked about the fact that immigration is good. And I think we need to get the Democratic Party message back to being boldly pro-immigrant. We can be pro-immigrant while having an orderly, safe, and legal way of people migrating here. And that's what the vast majority of people in Texas and across the country want. We are in a difficult political situation right now, and I think it's good for us to acknowledge that. And part of progressives' job, I think, are, one, to make sure that the party takes on popular progressive positions, and in places where we're sometimes being outmaneuvered by the right wing and their media allies, recognize we have persuasion work to do. And I think that if the American people see a Democratic Party that is pro-immigrant, that has solutions on reducing forced displacement so that people can stay home that want to stay home, and then have legal, orderly, and safe ways for people to migrate here, then we're all actually better off. But I don't think that's the current place that we're at or the current message that we're honing in on, and that's where we need to get to. I think it's a message that people in Texas would buy in on. But right now, the right wing's main way of trying to win elections is to scapegoat a small group of people, attack them, and distract from the fact that they're really just there for their billionaire buddies and to basically have corporate tax cuts. I think we need to call them out for it, but it's going to take some work. And that's the work that I think our movement is ready to do, to be able to move us back to being able to get to comprehensive immigration reform.
So does it work, though? Because we know that we're less than 60 days maybe away from one of the most momentous elections in our lives. Does it work that Kamala Harris right now says that she will make sure that that bipartisan border bill actually gets passed?
Well, what she has clearly talked about is border enforcement paired with there being comprehensive immigration reform and a pathway to
Pathways,
citizenship
exactly.
for people here. And that's actually the first time I ever visited the Hill. Was about just a little over 10 years ago when there was a Gang of 8 bipartisan bill to do just that. And Speaker Boehner regrets it today, but was a coward and didn't put it on the floor to get it passed. I hope that we finally send that bill to President Kamala Harris so that the people that make this city and this state run, that make sure our kids are taken care of and buildings get built and kids get taught, the entire Texas economy and culture and way of life is built oftentimes by people that have been here 10, 20, 30 years that have never had their citizenship recognized. And I hope we finally get that in a bill, and that'd be a bill I'd be proud to send to President Kamala Harris's desk.
Keith, listen, immigration's not limited to just Florida, Georgia, California, and those other states.
National issue.
Minnesota is a proud state of immigrants. I don't know if you guys know, but Keith and I are filming a buddy movie today because we spent the entire day together.
We're just
so
hanging
far.
out.
It's been fun. So, Keith, one of the things you said on a panel or a podcast that we just did talked about the fact, though, that there's no more population growth that's happening in America. Work isn't getting done because of what's happening in terms of the way that immigrants are being treated and how they're being removed from our country. Your thoughts about how states that are not on, quote unquote, the border, how the immigration issue is being framed, especially, again, through the lens of being progressive.
Yeah, let me tell you, immigration is certainly a national issue. And I can tell you that talking to dairy farmers, egg farmers, all kinds of folks across Minnesota, that what we're hearing about is labor shortages, not enough people to get all the work done. And, we have one particular dairy that has provided, housing for people because they need them that bad. One guy said to me, build a wall. No, we need to build a road here. That's what we need. And, look, if you look at your average carpenter, the average age for your average carpenter is what, 58? How old's your average plumber? How old's your average electrician? How old's your average dairy farmer? I mean, a lot of these folks who I talk to say, look, my son doesn't want to do this. He's a coder. He's a programmer in Minneapolis or in San Francisco, and he doesn't want to do this anymore. So if we're not going to let people into the country, then it will ultimately harm the country. And so we need to find a way to be orderly, of course. It needs to be, systematized and regulated. But saying that we're going to, close our doors as a nation is just bad for a whole lot of reasons, especially and including the GDP and the economic livelihood of people in the United States.
It's not just closing doors, it's the promise of massive deportation.
Well, right, and even J.D. Vance is like, well, first you just take the low-hanging fruit, then you take this, then you take, they're planning it out. The bottom line is of course we need an orderly process, but of course we also need people to help fuel this country. By the way, this is an important thing. Our country, not so much, in the past, we haven't always played a constructive, helpful role in places like Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. They say, oh, they're invading the United States. Well, the United States has actually invaded those countries with the Marines. That's a fact. We supported Juan Orlando Hernandez in Honduras, who he and his brother were prosecuted for drug crimes in New Jersey not months ago. So when he helped effect the coup against Zelaya in Honduras, we supported him, and then when the demand for a free and fair election happened, we were like, yeah, he can run. Even though he was part of a coup, the Organization of American States said that's not all right. We said it was all right.
Well, I think it's an important point. When we talk about an orderly system,
Yeah.
We should actually be calling out, I'm correcting myself here, that the disorderly system is being propagated by the Republicans themselves. And people being pushed out of their homes is being propagated by the Republicans and, frankly, sometimes right-wing policies passed by our own party ourselves. And so actually, this is a real case where the arsonists, in this case, I think the Republicans that don't want an orderly and legal immigration system, come and blame the firefighters And we have to call them out for it, because any crisis, any disorder that we're seeing, we've got options and solutions for solving it. We've got ways that people can apply, ways that people can fly here, ways that people don't have to pay a cartel to be able to move to this country. And then we've got folks like Ken Paxton, who I have trouble calling an attorney general when I'm sitting next to this guy.
Ken.
Suing to block legal and orderly immigration programs. They want to make legal immigration as illegal as possible, complain about it, blame us for it, and think the American people are chumps. And I don't think the American people are chumps.
Yeah, they're pouring kerosene on it the whole time.
If I could just add this, it is important for the United States to be a consistent supporter of human rights throughout the world. And certainly we shouldn't be, we should stand with the region and say where there was an undemocratic action that occurred, we're not going to stand and say that's fine. And so I think it is important. I mean, it's important to understand that when we were hearing about the caravans all those years ago, these were people who, because of political turmoil in their country, were trying to go to the safe place, which was
Find
here.
a better place to live.
And it's not just like a matter of, it's not economic migrants. People were getting killed, murdered, disappeared on the Atlantic coast.
Gangs, too.
Yeah, and criminal gangs, many of whom were deported from the United States back there. And so I just think that
They get their guns from Texas.
well, and I think it's important for us to be. I mean, Mexico filed a lawsuit against some of these gun manufacturers because of the migration of these weapons into their country. So, I mean, look, we need diplomatic solutions, regional cohesion, and we've got to create economic viability or promote it in other parts of the world so people don't have to leave their language, their family, their culture just to come here to make a living.
And you do that through a leader that other world leaders respect and actually with whom they can work. So in order to effect change, though, you got to go out and vote. And I know all of you that are here are going to go out and vote. And it's not just on the national level, it's also locally. Greg, you just signed a letter with Joaquin Castro, Jasmine Crockett, and others to the DOJ about the voter suppression that is happening by Ken Paxton. We got it going in Florida, too. We got Ron DeSantis checking everybody's signature for the Amendment 4 for the abortion bill that we have on the ballot in November. But we see really violative voter suppression, intimidation tactics that are happening here in Texas. What's going on with that?
Ken Paxton, again, hard to call him an attorney around Ken or Keith and anybody else here in the audience. He is suing our counties for basically telling unregistered voters, hey, you've got a right to vote. Here's how you can apply to make sure you're a registered voter. That's the most baseline American thing that we could do. And he's basically saying, I don't want new folks or people who move from one address to another, U.S. citizens, to get a chance to vote. It's just ridiculous. It's something that you think you'd pick up and read about in the 1940s or 1950s, but it happened, just last week. And so I think that the Department of Justice needs to get way more aggressive with ensuring that there's justice. The idea that we should wait until after the election to deal with voter suppression for this election is just crazy. And so I think we need to push both the administration and make sure that there's public awareness around it. And part of what I hope we do about it is that if we hold on to the Senate, get rid of the Jim Crow filibuster, and flip the House, that we send the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to President Kamala Harris's desk to be signed.
There we go.
So that there is automatic voter registration. Because to be clear, you having to register to vote in this way already is a form of voter suppression.
Yep.
Speaking of other countries, when I tell people in other countries that we send out these voter registration forms and nonprofits go and track you down, and you have to get certified to become a VDR to register somebody to vote, that's already a Jim Crow voter suppression law we live under.
Very true.
They already know you're a citizen. You can automatically get registered to vote. So ending gerrymandering in states like Texas so that there's actual representation for the people. Ending Citizens United so that voters choose instead of big corporations playing in our elections. And automatic voter registration and maybe even just some mail-in ballots. I think that would make it much more clear. I know the panel here is Progressive America. I think it could be so much more clear how progressive this country really is if everyday and working class voters had a fair shot at making their voice heard in our elections.
Great point. And by the way, a lot of the things that Greg just mentioned are already being done in other states. I mean, look, in Minnesota, we have everything from early vote to same-day voter registration. I think in South Dakota, North Dakota, one of the two, you don't have to register to vote. You are registered to vote automatically. In Oregon, they have mail vote and vote by mail. I mean, people, if you want to get an accurate sense of what the people want, this is what you need to do.
And I'll note, Minnesota has what? Governor Tim Walz.
Sure do.
Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, and Attorney General Keith Ellison. So something's in the water that's working in Minnesota.
Well, I'm going to tell you, though, there's a lot. Texas has some of the greatest progressive movements this country has ever seen. There's no reason.
Because there's no choice. It has to exist, right?
Yeah. But I mean, Jim Hightower, one of our nation's great progressive leaders, Molly Ivins. There's Mickey Leland. There's the great Sheila Jackson Lee, who rest in peace. There is no shortage of people who thirst for justice and inclusion in Texas. It's a wonderful state. We just got to get the voices out there, and the change will happen.
Keith, surprisingly, many people think when you use the label progressive that it means that you're just even farther left to the left. And yet, there is an issue that is very important and near and dear to your heart that actually is a unifier with the GOP. And that are economic issues.
Yeah.
So what would you say, because we've seen success in your state under your tenure as the AG, when it comes to progressive economic agendas, because you focus on the people and their bottom line dollars?
Honestly, we go to the middle and end with shared prosperity, right? That's it. My motto to my staff is we're here to help people afford their lives and live with dignity, safety, and respect. And where do we start? Family budget. How's your wages looking? We started a wage theft unit where we prosecute people stealing workers' wages. How's your loans, your student loans, your payday loans, your medical bills? We're going after these lenders, making sure they're fair with people, and we're even working on buying debt, medical debt. We moved into the price of medicines. We go then to the price of groceries. We have a lawsuit against a company called AgriStats, which we believe is illegally sharing data in a way that encourages people to raise prices on groceries. And we have one called a lawsuit against RealPage, which does the same thing with computer algorithms for housing. So our square starts with that economic prosperity. We have every reason to believe that America can have shared prosperity. I tell you, in the 1950s, we had segregation, no women's rights, and LGBTQ community was locked out, but one person could feed a family of four. 1/3 of all Americans were in a union or paid as if they were. We're trying to get an economy where we have shared prosperity plus equity, and that's the America that the progressive vision is embracing. Now, once you get to that economic viability, what happens? Your voter participation increases. Your say-so in what we're going to do about our environment and clean water, clean air, food-free of pesticides, that expands out. It's hard to afford your life when you turn the faucet and some green-looking crazy stuff comes out. And so it all kind of starts from there and moves out. We know, and we just talked about immigration and even foreign policy a little bit, our ability to live a life of shared prosperity is contingent upon how we engage the rest of the world. Oftentimes, trade, immigration, and all those issues are interrelated. So yeah, we start with economic viability, strong unions, the right to organize, government intervention to rebalance the scales against monopolists and antitrust violators, which is something that you guys are looking at more and more. I'm so excited that the United States has a rebirth of interest in antitrust and anti-monopoly. This is a very big piece. We've doubled our antitrust group, and we're going after these monopolists who are literally conspiring not only against consumers but against workers, against small businesses. And why in the world does somebody like why does Elon Musk have $150 billion? Yep. Well, because I think we're not enforcing the antitrust laws against them. We ought to hold them accountable. And I think that we need to look around and say, if you have an industry where you have 2 or 3 people who dominate the entire industry, maybe that's not a competitive market. Maybe that's not good for consumers, other businesses, workers, the environment, nobody.
And Greg, you're also focusing on meeting the people where they are, the people where they are. You have been a huge advocate for protections of workers as well.
And as you said it in your earlier question, this is an issue that brings voters together
It's not
across
a
the aisle.
political
Now,
issue.
I don't think it necessarily has, and importantly, it hasn't brought many GOP officials across the aisle, but most people are.
People get it.
Yeah, as Keith was mentioning, the very first thing that I did after getting elected as a member of Congress, first press release we sent out after election night was calling for a Department of Labor investigation against Elon Musk's Tesla factory right up the street here for safety violations. And I had more conservative constituents say, I was hoping you would do something like that. I don't agree with you on multiple things, but thank you for that. Because, taking care of workers, making sure that the billionaire class actually pays their fair share in taxes, make sure they pay fair wages, that's something that brings people together across the aisle. And it gives us a chance as Democrats to actually have a contrast with Republican officials who might say they're pro-worker, but they never vote that way, ever.
Yep.
The first bill that I then voted on, was asked to vote on as a member of Congress after this whole Republican election about inflation and crime. It wasn't about inflation or crime. Their first bill they presented in the Congress was to slash the IRS's enforcement against billionaires and corporate tax cheats.
My goodness.
And we got to say that 1,000 times because the Democratic Party, not that long ago, was not this party overwhelmingly at the national level going after those billionaires and tax cheats, but now we are. And that shows that that progressive vision has now moved into the mainstream of the party. And that helps us bring more people along. And I think that's going to help us win this election to show, for example, that we don't want to expand the Trump tax scam, as he's out there saying, that we actually, if the voters help us flip the House and send Kamala Harris to the White House, that will actually increase that corporate tax rate to where it should be and make sure people can afford child care and afford elder care and go to the hospital and not be bankrupted. I think that's
right.
the Democratic Party of LBJ and Barbara Jordan.
Sure is, and it's the progressive wing of the Democratic Party today, on the very forefront of saying, this is an economy that everybody should be able to experience prosperity, and if you're too young to work,
Opportunity economy, as it's being called.
well, yeah, but if you're too young to work, you're too old to work, or if you're too sick to work, or if you're just down on your luck for a while, we believe in a compassionate economy where your neighbors should help you get through the tough times. I believe in a Democratic Party and a progressive party that is unafraid to be advocates for the poor. My religion tells me that we should be advocates for the least of thee, and I think that's a progressive vision too. Yes, middle class, yes, the business folks, I'm for them, no problem, but poverty is a major problem in our country. We got a lot of people going to bed who are food insecure, house insecure, can't, get the health care that they need. And in the richest country in the history of the world, at the richest point in its history, that shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't have people living in tents. We shouldn't have all that.
But were those basic tenets of decency, were they in the big tent of the Democratic Party, were they there and then they got pushed to the fringe and now they're coming back into the more center of view?
Are you trying to get us to name names or what? So
No.
look, guys.
No, but I'm asking, I feel like, because when you talk about progressives, especially in the Democratic Party, sometimes people say that's almost like a negative thing. But it sounds to me what you're saying to all of us is these are basic tenets of decency that are the actual foundations of America.
So some people were trying to crack on Tim Walz, said, oh, he's progressive. I said, how is it progressive if you're a teacher and you see hungry kids,
and you feed
then
them.
When you get to be governor, you pass a universal meal program? That's pragmatic. That's sensible. That's sensible. And so oftentimes what a progressive really is somebody who recognizes the need to respond to an urgent problem before others get the awareness or the guts to work on it, right? I mean, think about it. I mean, so often things that we so many things that we take for granted are progressive today. Universal public education was considered progressive at one time.
Yeah.
to not be able to own another person. The abolitionists were like troublemaking.
The radicals, yeah.
Radicals. Suffragettes. Oh, women voting? Oh my God, that's so progressive. I mean, my point.
Just a minute ago, gay marriage was
Right.
was polling under 50%, and President Obama couldn't run on it. And the progressives organized, got the message out, and now it's like 80 or 90% of the country.
Yeah, the progressives are the gutsy people who say 1 + 1 = 2 when others don't want to say it.
Commit it. They
If
don't
I say that, oh, well, will that be expedient? Will people like me? Does that poll well? Oh my goodness. The progressives are like, we don't give a damn whether it polls well. We're going to say it and we're going to do it because it's what's right. That's the progressive position. And that doesn't mean progressives don't listen and don't compromise. I think that sometimes you got one thing that separates what I think progressives from the far left is that we understand that having some slices of bread is better than not having any bread at all. And I'm not hating on the far left, but I will say some of them are like, well, if we can't have every single thing we're asking for, it's a sellout to take some of it and then come back for the rest later. And I just don't agree with that.
Greg, do you agree with that position?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what is so important about governing and about winning, because the communities that we represent can't afford for us to not deliver for them,
right.
And then build off of it. And so I think there's a way you compromise without compromising your values.
Right.
And I think being able to show and boldly deliver wins inspires more wins.
Right. And here's the other thing about progressive being cast as not a good thing. Folks, we just have to accept the fact that the MAGA conservative movement will always and without fail attack your character. They're just going to do it. It's not when they're going to do it. They're going to do it. They attacked Obama for wearing a tan suit. They're coming for you, man. They're going to run your name into the dirt because they know that most people don't know the details of all these policy issues. We were in Congress, and it's hard to keep up with all this stuff. I mean, and so they know that what people are going to go on is, do I feel like I can trust that person? So conservatives say, we're going to make sure that you don't think you can trust that person. We're going to go for their good name and try to tear it down. And that is what all of this stuff is about. That's why a guy who spent 24 years in the Army National Guard has somebody trying to tear down his service. My goodness. Really? Yeah, really. That's where we're at. So do not fear that somebody's going to say something unkind about you. Stand for the right thing. And if you keep at it and you organize with others, you're going to get it.
Is there a line of demarcation, Greg, between progressives and what Keith calls the far left?
Well, I mean, of course, folks fall on an ideological spectrum, but what I've found is so important are the people that are really there to do the work.
Right.
The people whose hearts are open are really there to do the necessary policy change. And I think that, for example, in the tax fight next year with the Trump tax scam expiring, there's going to be really important negotiation going on. And I think that if progressives hold back and don't speak out and don't push for the best deal we can get, make sure that we level the playing field the most we can, then the conversation will necessarily get dragged more further and further to the right. So I think it's going to be our goal to organize and push to get the best deal we can, but we can't walk away. We can't be scared to walk away from the table from a bad deal, but we also have to recognize that if we can pull hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty, if we can raise that corporate tax rate back up and the way that Trump plummeted it down, then that could actually inspire people to come back and vote and participate again if there's some stuff that has to get left on the table, because necessarily it's going to be a negotiation. I mean, I hope for a landslide election, but given the way that gerrymandering exists in this country and the undemocratic way that the Senate isn't actually controlled by majority will, we have to recognize that even if we do really well in this election, it's not going to be, we're probably not going to be able to deliver everything that folks on the left might want. But I think we can actually get a really, really good deal for the country, because the vast majority of the American people think it's nuts that so many of these billionaires pay a lower tax rate than, the folks working backstage right now, or the people cooking and serving food out front.
Yeah, and I will say this about people who operate on political polls. the function that they play is that they move what they call the Overton window. If you demand, fair wages and you're uncompromising, you create possibility for people who are a little bit closer to the center. That's how it works. So I'm not here to say people who demand on their moral imperative are somehow bad. I don't believe that. But what I will say is everybody has to recognize that at the end of the day, we need some things to deliver. We've got to have some things to deliver. So, if we say we're not going to take any immigration bill except for the one that I would write by myself, then we're not going to get anything, and we're going to then have the status quo. So understand, oftentimes the issue is not the Republican wish list bill versus the Democratic wish list bill. It's the status quo versus everything else. So if you want to make change and you think that the status quo is untenable, you've got to be willing to do a deal at some point.
So I will say this, Keith. One of the most incredible moments in my life, and as a lawyer to appreciate, was the prosecution of Derek Chauvin.
Yeah.
Derek Chauvin, his co-conspirators, and to honor it sounds odd to say to honor the injustice of what happened to George Floyd, but that's what you did. You made it possible for people to believe that there really is justice as it's defined in the truest of senses. Truly. And it happened on your watch. It continues to happen on your watch. Talk about what the progressive American agenda looks like when it comes to criminal justice, because that's a big thing that affects all of us.
Thank you for asking about that. But let me just tell you, after the verdict came back against Chauvin, I actually made a comment to the press and to the country where I said, we didn't deliver justice. We delivered some accountability. If you really want to make a move toward justice, we've got to change policy. And that's why our beloved brother Greg, I'm so glad you guys are trying to move on the George Floyd Justice and Policing.
Yes.
We got it. We can't just, my biggest worry about the case, and I'll tell you this, Katie, my biggest worry is people be like, okay, he was a bad cop. Y'all prosecuted him. Good. Next. I'm like, no, this happens too often, and we need to have some real policy. And I believe that most police officers join the department because they want to do good, that they're sincere, loyal, dedicated, and want to help people. But if you allow the racists and the bullies to stay on the department, they often can change the entire culture of the department, because when Derek Chauvin did what he did, nobody said Derek Chauvin did it. They said the police did it. And so there are 18,000 police departments across this country who they have communities that rely on them to maintain safety. If we don't get rid of the worst actors who don't live up to the promises of that badge, then those communities cannot bond with those departments to create a safe community. So it is actually public safety to prosecute the Derek Chauvins of this world. When Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd with his colleagues, there were people watching. One was a 9-year-old girl who saw it. Yeah. She was 9 when she saw it. What about when she's 19? What about when she's 29? What is she going to tell her children? She's going to, and we got to be, like, when the police are looking for somebody who committed a murder or a rape or some horrendous crime, we need community to open the door to say, yeah, officer, I saw them go that way. But if you create a bad environment in that neighborhood, they're not going to open their door. And so we've got to do police reform for the sake of police and the communities that they protect. And so I just want y'all to know, understand that I got great respect for police who do that job right, who live up to the promise of that badge. And I don't want them to have to be on the force with somebody like Derek Chauvin. And we've got to create an environment where they don't have to.
So what happens, though, Greg, when we see the news yesterday that the national FOP endorses Donald Trump? How does that supposed to lead to the reassurance to Americans that do follow the law, that are looking for accountability, and believe that there's a double standard when it comes to people like Donald Trump?
I think that it is so important as the Attorney General was just laying out, for us to fully claim public safety as a progressive.
Absolutely.
That making sure that you are safe from violence, be it state violence or violence on the street,
Right.
is a progressive reform.
Right.
Here, the local Austin community finally went out and voted overwhelmingly to get rid of these secret police misconduct files, and a court just ruled that it's got to be opened up. That's not just a police accountability progressive reform, it's a public safety and good governance reform. Here on my arm, I was just in Uvalde this week, and I have here bracelets remembering, Layla Salazar's dad gave me this one to remember her, and Marie Jo Garza's grandmother gave me this bracelet to remember her and all those kids. And I promised I would wear them and keep them on my desk until we finally voted on gun reform for public safety, to respect those kids and those families. And that is just a core public safety issue. Because as those police officers waited for over an hour to go in and save those kids, and there was so much wrong with that, part of it is that people were scared of the machine gun. And we can all get that. I mean, it's unacceptable what happened, unacceptable that they didn't go in and save those kids, but the number of guns in this country and the power of those weapons of war is a public safety issue. And I don't know how you can say you're a party of public safety and say we should just be selling AR-15s out the Walmart. And Democrats should be running on that every day of the week. And I feel very committed that that should be, part of the day one agenda if we're able to flip this house.
I totally agree, man. And let me just say, you're seeing local prosecutors, and I'm a prosecutor, respond. In Michigan, and now I think in Georgia.
In Georgia. Yeah.
You're seeing prosecutors say, you know what? This guy is threatening to commit school shootings, and you buy him an AR-15?
For Christmas.
You're culpable in this. But at the end of the day, folks, let me tell you, as much as I think it is proper in the right fact pattern, for those parents to be charged, I also think that Greg is ultimately right, that we've got to find ways to protect people's Second Amendment rights, but to get these weapons of war off the street. You cannot say you're for public safety and you're for guns here, there, and everywhere, all the time, anytime. And we've got to come to that conclusion. The problem is that when a horrific shooting happens, sometimes it provokes the public sentiment so strongly that we rise up. But then the other team...
For how long?
Yeah, but then the other team just outlasts us.
Yeah.
And this is what we're up against.
So, Keith, another thing that I really wanted to bring to our audience's attention is something that I found to be so fascinating about you, and it completely does fit with the vision of a progressive America, which, when we say climate, which, by the way, I have to say, hats off to y'all here in Austin. Your weather's beautiful, which is stunning. I was just here 2 weeks ago, and this weather is amazing, and I live in Miami, so I can appreciate the heat and the humidity. But when you say climate, a lot of people don't think that necessarily fits with this agenda, and yet what you've done in Minnesota is you've deployed litigation. You've deployed lawsuits.
Right.
Against 6, you've got a current lawsuit pending in state court in Minnesota, against 6 of the largest fossil fuel companies, including Exxon.
Yep.
And when we say it's climate litigation, y'all might think, well, what does that have to do with that? But it is.
Well, what it ultimately is consumer protection.
And that's what I want.
And it is a tenet of every state and the federal government's consumer protection laws is that if you produce a product, you cannot lie about that product. You can't say cigarettes are healthy for you, that they're particularly cool, that 4 out of 5 doctors smoke cigarettes. This is lies, right?
Yep.
If you want to sell cigarettes, just admit this stuff kills you. You sure? And if you're like, yep, give me one. Okay, fine. You're one, you know.
Yep.
Well, same with climate, right? This product, we all use this petroleum product. We use it. It is useful. But you can't say that it doesn't impact the climate. And they did for a long, long time and had a whole campaign lying about saying that anybody who complains about climate change is a chicken little, that there's no such thing, that the climate, there's no scientific consensus when there absolutely was. You paid one guy to say there wasn't, and that you call that a debate. It was never a debate. Manufacturing, just fake controversies. And so that's our lawsuit. Our lawsuit is in state court, which is very important because I don't trust the United States Supreme Court right
And
now.
by the way, Keith, the other side tried to get it to the Supreme Court.
Oh, that was one of the big battles, is them trying to remove us to federal court.
To get in front of that conservative SCOTUS majority.
To trying to get in front of get on a favorable playing ground so they can get a hometown referee, But no, we kept it in Minnesota State Court because it impacts Minnesotans. This case is about Minnesotans. And we've seen farmers who, sometimes there's drought for long stretches. Other times there's way too much water and then the crops are rotting in the field. We have our indigenous community that's having their ricing heavily impacted in Minnesota. We have, the Ojibwe and Dakota peoples, and ricing is a big part of their culture. And that's negatively impacted, together with many other adverse effects. And so they have lied about it, and now we're going to make them tell the truth about it, and we're going to help mitigate the harm of it. And it's all based on a consumer theory. So it's moving forward, and I'm telling you, if you're listening out there, Exxon, we're not that inclined to settle this case. Maybe this case should be tried. Maybe the country needs to see all the stuff you did that was so dishonest and unfair. Of course, I'm not going to make any determination of what we're going to do on this stage right here, right now. It's a trial. Decision.
We're not breaking news?
No, sorry, but I'm just saying. I guess I'm saying something that I think you could appreciate. Most cases that are ever filed are settled.
Yep.
Settlement is how we do.
It's just how things
the way it is nowadays. But some cases should be tried. Like you mentioned the Chauvin case.
Yep.
Look, there was an offer on the table because that's how we do business every day. But it was not some, get out of jail free card either. And when it was turned down, I'm like,
let's roll.
All good. Let's get a jury up here. Because one of the great values of a jury trial is that you lay out that evidence and you show the country what's going on. We tried Juul. Who's familiar with Juul? Anybody? The vaping company?
Yeah.
They were marketing to children. We sued them, and we went all the way through trial. And right when we were about to start closing arguments, they were like, can we go talk for a minute in the conference room? And I'm going to say, you better be ready to make it worth my while. And we were able to get that, and we're going to get money to reduce juvenile nicotine use in Minnesota. I'm very proud about that. Anyway, there you go.
So, I actually do think that's completely worth some applause. Greg, you are uniquely situated in D.C., and you have goals and you have objectives that you want to achieve for your constituents and for Americans at large. How do you navigate that considering the folks on the other side of that aisle?
I think that in these first couple of years in Congress, it's become so clear that some of these folks just can't be convinced. And even if their constituents are with us on many of these issues, they're not going to get moved. And I think part of that is sort of this right-wing ecosystem. And I think some of them just have to get beat. I think some of these folks just have to lose their elections.
Yeah.
And I think that requires sort of a long-term view of organizing. As Keith was saying, I think we can't just say, well, we tried this time and it didn't work and we give up. I think it's going to take an arc of work and an arc of time. And it takes us highlighting as progressives those issues that Republican members of Congress refuse to move on that impact their daily life. And as we were just talking about climate, for example,
Sure.
When I first started running for office 10 years ago, we would talk about climate change as this theoretical thing. Well, it's here. Mm-hmm. And in Texas, we're talking about, for example, putting into effect Biden's heat rule, which would make it so that every 2 hours, if you're working and over 90 degrees, you get to take a break and get a drink of water. I mean, something basic like that. 90% of voters 90% of voters across the ideological spectrum
Support
it.
Of course.
Brings everybody together. And we have Republican members of Congress saying, well, why don't you just go find another job? I mean, what an entitled...
And they can get water anytime they want.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we have to continue to highlight those issues. People have to have electoral consequences. And then, but we know that they're, given gerrymandering and infinite money in politics, we can't flip them all that way. And so I think once there is a sufficient majority, we have to go and fix the system. We have to make sure, for example, that the people of Washington, D.C. can actually have voting representatives in the United States Congress. We have to pull big money out of politics and make sure that people can actually be adequately represented. But to get there, I think we have to be able to persuade people by going right at the issues that some of these people that feel like politics isn't for them, that really speaks to them, and I think the Democratic Party is doing better at that, and calling out the Republicans on where they're way off from their base. I've started talking about, we hear about cartels nonstop now over there. I think that cartel leaders love the Republican Party platform. The cartel leaders are like, oh, you want to make immigration really hard to do so that there's a black market for cartels to work in?
Yep.
Pro-cartel policy on the Republicans' part. Oh, we can't get guns from Mexico or Latin America, but the majority of the guns that they confiscate from the cartels are from the United States, and the majority of those U.S. guns are Texas guns. In Texas, the Texas Republicans say they want people to be able to get guns without a license, without a background check. That's about as pro-cartel of a policy as you've ever heard.
Yep.
And so I think we have to run right at them on issues like that.
But like, that's why I'm glad that this is a wonderful conference thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here because if people
They didn't stop you at the border coming in.
No, they let me in. If people are exposed to another way of thinking on these issues,
Yes.
so often they will share it. And all of you have loved ones, you got friends, you got relatives who are kind of trying to figure out this very complicated, complex world, and they're inundated with all these messages. But if we can get together and just chop it up a little bit, we can go out there, and I believe that the future is bright if we can keep on sharing this sensible message. So it's like what you just said about guns and the pro-cartel thing. That's kind of like, yeah.
So I want to remind everybody that we actually have the ability to take questions. But I was going to ask Keith one more question. But if you do have questions, it's texastribune.org/ask. So make sure that you send the questions and we'll have them. But very quickly, Keith, before we do the Q&A, we're blessed to have Congressman Casar go from Texas to D.C. You have done this. By the way, I don't know if y'all know this, but Tim Walz and Keith Ellison went to D.C. together at the same time. So Keith Ellison was in Congress and then came back to Minnesota and ran for state office in Minnesota. Do you think that it is something that has to be done where we kind of go and remove ourselves from the national level to come back to the state and local level to affect change because of the fact that there's so much chaos and dysfunction that happens in D.C.? Not at your feet, by the way, Greg. But.
Well, let me just say, I think what we need to do is understand that we live in a world where all politics is local, but also all politics is national, and even now all politics is international. I think you all are very, very fortunate to have a former city council member representing you in Congress. He gets that micro issue. He gets garbage, he gets policing, he gets those issues right there on the ground.
Democracy is local.
Democracy. Yes. And from my standpoint, it really helps that I have a Washington, D.C. Congress perspective. So I know that this is not some nameless, faceless black box where nothing can ever happen, because I've been up there to know that, yeah, things can happen. It's not easy, but it can happen. And so I don't carry back that level of cynicism that sometimes if you really don't have any D.C. exposure, you can just throw your hands up and figure like nothing good can happen out of that place. It's not true. Good things can happen out of that place and do happen out of that place. So what I'm saying is that look at your local representative as connected to your state person, as connected to your federal representative, and really try to see them as one team whose job it is to advance your will and the best interests of your family. And always bear in mind that all of them are critical in order to be effectively representing you, And then you got the representatives and the legislative team. don't forget about the executive branch folks. Those folks are part of this conversation too. We've got to see politics as one team, all dedicated to helping your family, and you've got to know how to pull each lever to make your family best off.
I think ironically, the party that's actually done a good job on that is the GOP, but they're all infected with Trumpism, and that's the reason why. So it's
We got to get better.
Okay, question.
Great. Thank you so much for your questions. The first one, Heidi from Austin mentioned Cesar's history of practicing collaborative governance at the local level and asks, how do you take that practice to Congress?
That is such an important question because we in Austin have really shown how when social movements are able to partner with local elected officials, we can do so much. And that is much harder to do at the national level because the country is really so big. And I think that's something that we still have to work on as a Congress is to figure out how it is that we can partner with folks on the ground. And I think one of the places where we're seeing this happen more and more is actually through the growing labor movement. Right now we see a resurgence of the labor movement across the country. And that's a nonpartisan, independent movement, separate of members of Congress, separate of the government, that I think is a driving force behind making the Democratic Party more close to the people. Right. And I think that is actually to the benefit of the party and is going to result in better policy for people. Just yesterday, actually one of the biggest IRS centers in the country is here in Southeast Austin. I was just there with Treasury of Secretary Yellen, and I never thought that we'd have the Treasury Secretary stand up in front of a bunch of IRS employees and say, I'm here proud to announce that you guys are getting the millionaire tax cheats, non-filers. We're finally getting them, and now we're going after their private planes that they write off as business expenses but use for themselves. I don't think we get there without the union movement, and that means that people have to be organizing all across the country and every congressional district.
Right.
And that's happening now in this organic way, and now I think it's our job as legislators to protect that right and expand that right so more people can do it and build that virtuous cycle.
And that's why you're working on the?
PRO Act.
The PRO Act. Please learn about it. It's a very important piece of legislation.
Working for the workers is what's happening here.
Yeah.
Next question.
Thank you. Emma, a student at the LBJ school, said she appreciates Ellison's leadership on Palestine and asks, are you encouraged to see the country move in the right direction on that issue?
Important.
Yeah, so the question for, if you didn't hear it is, U.S., Israel, Palestine relationship, which way forward? Let's just be clear. This situation is completely unsustainable as it exists now. Palestinian people, we have over 40,000 that have been killed. All of them have been displaced. Massive hunger, threats of starvation, diseases like cholera breaking out. And let me just tell you, I've been to Gaza 3 times since 2009. Have seen, after all these wars, I've gone there, and I'm telling you, it was rough before. And then, of course, there was a blockade around Gaza, and you couldn't get in or out. There was all this. I remember talking to an Israeli general saying, General, can we please get coriander and lentils into Gaza? And he said, well, I'll think about it. I got to make sure that they can't, they're not dual use or whatever. And so, because they didn't want anything in there that could be used for weapons of war. And so what ended up happening with the blockade is that these tunnels began to grow. And so you had this traffic that nobody knew what was coming through the tunnel. And so here we are, October 7th happens. Tragically, 1,200 Israelis killed, kidnapped. And then that evokes this massive response. I've heard people say, oh, well, Gaza, they voted for Hamas. So no, that's not true at all. First of all, you should know that this was literally a decade and a half ago, and most people in Gaza are under 18. They had nothing to do with the policy of Hamas. And there are groups in Gaza that are even more extreme than Hamas, by the way. And there are many they're just like us, they're just like Israelis, they're just like anybody else, they just want to live. So, but now we got Hezbollah in Lebanon jumping off. We got the Houthi rebels, which their weapons can reach the region. And you got the possibility of war with Iran, and why in the world would not Russia want to create as much difficulty as they could in the region. So my issue is, this is U.S. national stability, national security to bring peace to this situation. We can no longer say, well, it's between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and good luck working it out, call us if we can help. That hands-off attitude to peace there must come to an end. We have to say, no, you must come up with a sustainable arrangement there. We are going to use the tools at our disposal to make sure that this happens, because right now you're going to drag us into some mess. And so I think really that we've got to be far more robust. And look, I'm not one who's asking anybody running for president to commit now exactly what you're going to do. I think in an election, this issue is so volatile that I'm willing to give them exploration space. But there's one thing that has got, this is not going to just last. And I will just say, that I don't believe that the current leadership in Israel wants to come up with a solution. They just don't. That he's scared that he's going to face justice in Israel. And I think he's on the side. I actually think he'd prefer Trump to win, And so at this point, I just say we must continue. We must focus as a nation on the instability this conflict is causing. And you notice I have not tried to cast aspersions on anybody. I'm saying that we can't sit back and just say, the way we've done it is, if y'all want to negotiate peace, call us, and we'll call y'all over to Camp David and see what we can do. Those days have got to be days of the past. We've got to say, get in here now. We support both of you, and we need you to do what you got to bring this situation to order. And you can't bring order unless there is justice and peace and a future for Palestinian people and Israeli people.
We have time for one more question, right?
Great. Yeah. Samuel from San Marcos asks, as a trans person, I feel like progressives are quick to shy away from answering our community's need for help as Texas grows more hostile. How do you imagine a meaningful path to protecting transgender rights in a more progressive America?
Well, thanks for the question. And just like we were talking about immigration, I think it's the right way for us to close today, because just like we were talking about in the very first question here, about how the Republican strategy is so clear, it's been the strategy of the right wing for the whole history of the country that I've read, is pick a group of people, oftentimes that are having a hard time,
Denigrate them.
and say all the problems in the country are about them, and ignore the tax breaks for billionaires that they're up to, ignore the warmongering that the Republicans are up to. And they've picked on immigrants, and they've picked on trans people, and especially young trans people, people that are oftentimes already having a hard enough time in school. And I think that as progressives, our job is, one, to stand up for those basic rights of every single person, no matter who you are, including and especially trans folks and people that are targeted. And also, though, to provide to people the transparency about why they're doing it. Why is Greg Abbott making it his thing to go and bully trans kids and take away their health care? It's because he doesn't want to talk about the fact that he's defunding your public schools and taking teachers out of your public schools. He doesn't want us talking about the fact that he's handing out tons of money to the Elon Musks of the world. He doesn't want to answer questions about him not accepting our own tax dollars back here for the Medicaid program, which is killing people.
Right.
His policies are killing people and rewarding his rich backers, and that's why, part of why he enables his own hate and the hate of other people to beat up on the vulnerable. And I think we should lean in that way, because I think, to your question, there is a reaction sometimes inside parts of the Democratic Party to say, well, that's not polling the best, and let's walk away from it.
Right.
But we can't walk away from anybody, because when we walk away, the Republicans take more space.
Whew.
So we should lean in, support trans Texas, support immigrants, and then also, though, explain to folks that aren't trans or aren't LGBTQ or haven't had immigrants in their family for several generations why our futures are linked together. And that's what the LBJ coalition did. That's why a Texas president who used to be not the strongest in civil rights law wound up signing the Voting Rights Act into law, signing the Civil Rights Act into law, creating Medicaid, creating Head Start.
Right.
Because they built that broad-based coalition. And I think that we're called upon in this moment to try to do the same thing.
Well, Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today said we're all in this together.
That's right.
What she said. And we're all done. So I just want to say a round of applause for Congressman Greg Casar and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Thank you all for being here.
You got it, baby.
Two, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.